Falklands War saw more British losses as HMS Coventry, another brand new ship in service for just 3 years, was sunk by Argentine jets with bombs, and the container ship Atlantic Conveyor with an Exocet missile. The Atlantic Conveyor was carrying most of the helicopters due to be used by British ground forces, who would now have to walk everywhere. However, there was better news for the British a few days later, as the commandos and paratroopers won their first major land battle against Argentine forces at Goose Green. Back home, Aston Villa celebrated an unlikely victory in the European Cup final, beating Bayern Munich 1-0 in Rotterdam, while Pope John Paul II arrived for his visit to the UK, the first ever by a reigning pope. An estimated 2 million people in total would attend the 16 speaking engagements. Finally, a couple of days before the race in Detroit, the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Shlomo Argov, was shot in London. He survived, but would remain in a coma for 3 months. The assassins were Palestinian, but the attack was organised by the Iraqi Secret Service to try and goad Israel into attacking Lebanon, which is where the Palestine Liberation Organisation was based, which would in turn distract Iraq's rival Syria. The Grand Prix circus meanwhile moved across the Atlantic for a 2-race tour. The return to Montreal with the wound of Villeneuve's passing still raw would be tough, but first a new venue, the Motor City itself. There was, and remains, some confusion about the name of the event, with some official sources calling it the United States Grand Prix or the United States Grand Prix East, but almost everyone called it the Detroit Grand Prix, and given there were an unprecedented 3 races in the US this year, it made sense. The new circuit was, like Long Beach, a street circuit, laid out around a recently redeveloped area of Detroit along the river and its Renaissance Center complex of shops, offices, hotels and restaurants. When Henry Ford II wants something to happen in Detroit, it usually happens, and thus it was with the Grand Prix. Some of the drivers were sceptical about the circuit. Not only would it be run anti-clockwise, but run over a patchwork surface, partly concrete and partly tarmac, with all the expected bumps and divots, manhole covers, and even crossing a tram line at one point. Everyone except the Tolman team headed for the Motor City. Their team transporter got held up on its way back to base from Monaco, and there hadn't been enough time to make the trip. Ligier, meanwhile, had sent the JS-19 back to the factory for the North American tour and reverted back to their old JS-17 car. An acclimatisation session on Thursday had to be cancelled, as the roads hadn't been closed until that morning, and when FISA officials inspected the track, they required more barriers and escape roads to be put in before any driving could occur. Friday morning's testing was likewise scratched, as the drivers wanted more tyres in the escape roads, and the spectators were also looking a bit vulnerable. Finally, around 4 p.m. on Friday, there was just time to get a quick hour in. Perhaps predictably, the hour was interrupted several times to clear away crashed cars. Jarrier broke his suspension, Arnoux pinballed off a wall and demolished his rear end, and Jan Lammers broke his right thumb, crashing his Theodore. With the schedule now out of whack, Saturday would see 2 qualifying sessions in the morning and afternoon, with no more free practice, as they still had to squeeze support races in somewhere too. The morning session saw Nelson Piquet have to abandon one of his Brabham BMWs out on the circuit with engine trouble and have all sorts of problems with the spare. He ended the session dead last. And then it rained in the afternoon and no one was able to improve their time, so the world champion would have to sit the race out, in the company of Emilio Di Viotta. With Jan Lammers still in hospital and the Tolman boys at home, it would be just those two missing out. The combination of circuit unfamiliarity and a wet second session led to a somewhat mixed-up grid, but Pole had a familiar look, with Alain Prost parking his Renault there despite still having a foot strapped up from his Monaco crash. Alongside him was Andrea de Cesaris, then Rosberg and Pironi on row 2. Manfred Winkelhock put the ATS in his and its highest ever grid position, alongside Bruno Giacomelli, with the Lottie on row 4, Cheever 9th in the Ligier and Lauda 10th. Daly was 12th in the second Williams ahead of Lafitte, Patrese and Arnoux, with John Watson second in the title race but 17th on the grid after a qualifying crash with Chico Serra, who squeaked onto the grid 26th. The start was fine up at the front end, with Prost leading De Cesaris, Rosberg and Pironi, but Baldi and Bozel collided further back. Winkelhock's good qualifying work came undone on lap 2 when his suspension broke, De Cesaris had yet another broken driveshaft, and Jarrier Zazella went out with an ignition failure. Then on lap 7, a coming together between Guerrero and De Angelis put the Colombian in the wall, and Patrese crashed trying to avoid them. The Brabham's brake duct caught fire, and the marshals rather comically put it out, and in all confusion, the inexperienced organisers decided to red flag the race. After a very long delay of about an hour, the remaining 18 drivers reconvened to do the other 52 laps, with the times at the end of lap 6 being added on as an aggregate. Commentators wondered aloud if we could expect to lose an hour every time somebody went off, which, given the demolition derby last time out in Monaco, a circuit rather better known by most, was a real concern. When the lights went green again, Prost and Rosberg, starting from the front row after De Angelis' retirement, both got away like scalded cats, and the Renault squeaked into the first corner ahead, with Pironi, Giacomelli and Cheever chasing, and as so often happened, Pironi began holding up the cars behind him. Salazar was the first casualty of the second race, hitting a wall after going a bit wide in a corner. Rosberg was harrying Prost, who'd been having problems with his fuel injection, and as the Renault briefly stuttered, Rosberg took the opportunity to go round the outside and take the lead. The lead on the track, at least. He was still 3 seconds behind on aggregate. Further back in the Pironi train, Giacomelli had a colossal wobble and somehow managed to keep his Alfa on the track, allowing Cheever to get through and Lauda to close right up, and get past a few corners later. Before long, Pironi had closed up on Prost's ailing Renault and got past with relative ease. Meanwhile, John Watson was having a great race, making his way through the midfield from 17th on the grid to 7th. Prost dropped to the back of the Pironi train as Cheever, Lauda, Giacomelli and Watson all came through, then Watson got past the Alfa to go up to 5th. It was about half distance now, and Lauda was still charging, looking for a way past Cheever, while Giacomelli and Watson were having an entertaining duel, until the Italian made a rather optimistic lunge and deranged his front wheel, putting himself out. Prost came in to let the Renault team have a look at his car, which, together with Giacomelli's retirement, promoted Jacques Laffite to 6th place. Both Ligier's running in the point was a bit of a novelty so far this season. Rosberg had a huge lead by now, with the cameras understandably watching the great four-way scrap between Pironi, Cheever and the McLarens, as Lauda moved out of the way to let Watson have a crack at the American. It worked, and the Ulsterman took both Cheever and Pironi on the same lap before disappearing off into the distance. He'd gone from 5th to 2nd in the course of a lap on a tight street circuit. Lauda soon repeated the feat and passed Cheever and Pironi, while Watson was closing on Rosberg. Not only would he need time to catch and pass the Finn, but would then have to lead him home by over 15 seconds if he were to take the win on aggregate time. The first part was easy enough, as the McLaren stormed up to the back of the Williams and took the lead, and a few laps later Lauda tried to follow suit, but overcooked it and ended up in the wall. Next, Cheever was right up with and then passed Rosberg, who was having a problem with his fuel feed in addition to heavily worn tyres. Even Jacques Laffite, who'd deranged his nose in an altercation with Pironi earlier in the race, got past Rosberg. With the race closing on the 2-hour mark, Watson was over 25 seconds ahead of Cheever, and there was some uncertainty about when exactly the checkered flag would be shown. McLaren erred on the side of caution and got the 1 lap to go board ready, but it wasn't needed. The flag waved and John Watson took his 4th career win to move into the lead of the World Championship. Eddie Cheever took 2nd on the road and on timings for his best ever finish, and Pironi was 3rd to move ahead of Prost in the rankings. Rosberg came 4th overall, with Daly 5th and Laffite 6th. Mass, Sierra, Henton, Arnoux and Serra were all still running, and Prost not classified 8 laps back. The Renaults had both had the same fuel injection issues, and the race had been a complete nightmare for them. There was just a week to go before the following race in Canada, so not much time to reflect on things, but for all the organisational teething troubles and dodgy surface, the Detroit circuit had produced a cracking race, and most neutrals were hoping it would be renewed.